The day she left, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I would have screamed. Maybe that's how heartbreak starts, not with tears, but with disbelief that someone you planned forever with can just walk away. Her name was Claire, and she was my almost wife. 3 years of promises of building a life together in a small Seattle apartment with mismatched mugs, and an adopted cat that never liked me. 3 years of her, "I love you," whispered against my neck every night before she rolled over to scroll through her phone where, as it turns out, someone else was waiting. She left 2 weeks before our engagement party. No explanation. No closure. Just a neatly folded note that said, "I'm sorry, it's not you. I need to find myself." So I did what every rational, emotionally stable woman does after being dumped. I booked a solo trip across the country. California sounded like a good place to forget someone. Sunshine, beaches, endless strangers who didn't know my name. I packed nothing but a suitcase of sundresses, my camera, and a promise to myself that I wouldn't cry again. I landed in Monterey on a Sunday morning. The kind of morning that smells like sea salt and new beginnings. But I didn't feel new. I felt like a cracked mirror pretending to reflect something whole. The hotel receptionist smiled too brightly when she checked me in. Like she knew I was one of those women running away from something. Maybe she did. I wondered how many broken hearts had crossed her desk, trying to disguise themselves as tourists. That evening I wandered down to the beach. The ocean was cold, the sky bruised with orange and pink. I snapped photos without really looking, my fingers numb from the wind and the emptiness. That's when I saw her. She was painting. Alone, sitting cross-legged on a rock, hair whipping in the wind, her brush moving like she was fighting the sea itself. There was something magnetic about her, a quiet defiance, the kind you only see in people who've been through hell and made peace with the scars. I don't remember walking closer. I just remember her eyes when she looked up, green, bright, and painfully alive. "Sorry," I said, caught staring. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," she replied, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "You just looked lost." Her name was Riley. She was a local artist who painted the ocean every evening, she told me. Said the waves reminded her of people always changing, always crashing but never truly gone. We talked until the sun disappeared and the wind turned cold. She told me about her art studio downtown, about the stray dog she rescued, about the girlfriend she once loved and buried after a car crash 3 years ago. And when she said it, her voice didn't tremble. She carried her pain differently, like a stone she refused to drop because it reminded her of where she'd been. I envied her strength. I admired her honesty. The next day I found myself back at that same beach. Then again the day after. It wasn't planned. I told myself I was just there for the view, for the photographs, for the peace. But really I was there for her. For the way her laughter sounded like something warm breaking through the fog. Riley had a way of making silence comfortable. She didn't ask me about Claire. She didn't need to. Somehow she looked at me and already knew. "You don't have to pretend you're okay," she said once without looking up from her canvas. "You just have to be honest about not being okay." And I was. For the first time in weeks, I let myself be sad. I told her about the ring hidden in a drawer back home, about how I'd been rehearsing vows for a wedding that would never happen. I told her about the empty apartment, the way my cat still waited by the door at 6 p.m. every evening. She listened, really listened, and then she smiled, that soft, devastating smile. "Maybe love doesn't leave," she said. "Maybe it just changes its face." That night, she took me to her studio, a small, chaotic room filled with canvases and the smell of oil paint. The walls were alive with color. Crashing waves, moonlit cliffs, faces of women caught in emotion. I recognized some of them. "Are those people I've met?" she said. "People I didn't want to forget." I looked around until my eyes found one painting that made my breath catch. It was a woman sitting on the sand, hair tangled by the wind, eyes closed, as if letting the world fall apart around her. It was me. "You painted this?" I whispered. Riley nodded. "You looked like someone waiting to start over." Something inside me cracked open, then quietly, beautifully. We didn't kiss that night. She just held me, both of us sitting on the paint-stained floor while the waves roared faintly outside. I could feel her heartbeat, steady and patient, like the ocean itself. And for the first time since Claire walked out of my life, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I stayed in Monterey longer than planned. Days turned into weeks. Riley became my anchor in the strangest way, not fixing me, not filling the hole Claire left, but reminding me that I could stand on my own again. We cooked breakfast together in her messy kitchen, painting pancakes with syrup while she teased me for burning the eggs. We watched old black and white movies until midnight, her head on my shoulder. And every day the ache inside me softened a little more. Until one morning, as sunlight spilled through her window, she said it almost carelessly, like a truth she couldn't keep anymore. "I think I'm falling for you." The world stopped. For a long moment I said nothing, because the truth was I was falling too. But saying it out loud felt like betrayal. Like I'd be erasing what Claire and I had, even if that love had already died. Riley must have seen the fear in my eyes because she just smiled and said, "You don't have to say it back. Just don't run away from it." But that's exactly what I did. That night I packed my bags. I didn't tell her I was leaving. That was the cruelest part. At 4 a.m. Monterey was asleep. The waves whispered against the shore like they were trying to talk me out of it. My suitcase wheels left shallow lines on the sand, tracing my guilt all the way back to the car. I told myself it was the right thing, that I needed space, clarity, time to breathe before I turned a rebound into something real. But as I drove away from the coast, Riley's image in the rearview mirror haunted me. The way she painted, the way she looked at me like she saw every hidden fracture and didn't flinch. I checked into a small inn in Big Sur. The room smelled of cedar and rain. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise, trying to convince myself that leaving was self-preservation, not cowardice. But the truth burned hotter than any California sun. I wasn't running from Riley. I was running toward the ghost of someone who no longer existed, the version of me who believed love only came once. The next morning I drove aimlessly along Highway 1. The ocean stretched forever to my right, endless and unforgiving. Every time I thought about calling her, my throat closed. What would I say? "I'm sorry I left without a word?" Or worse, "I'm scared that I might actually love you." I ended up at a roadside diner somewhere south of Carmel. A waitress with tired eyes refilled my coffee 3 times before she finally asked, "You okay, honey?" That simple question, kind, ordinary, nearly broke me. My hands trembled as I reached for the cup. "I don't know," I said honestly. She gave a small, knowing smile. Nobody ever does. Outside, a storm was brewing. The sky darkened, and the waves pounded the cliffs as if trying to pull the land back into the sea. I sat in my car, rain hammering against the windshield, realizing how pathetic it was that I could handle losing Claire but not the thought of hurting Riley. I drove back. By the time I reached Monterey, the storm had swallowed the sky whole. Her studio light was still on, a flicker of gold in the gray rain. My heart thudded like it wanted to jump out of my chest. I opened the door. She was there, barefoot, paint on her fingers, facing a new canvas. She didn't turn around. "You left," she said quietly, her brush never stopping. "I figured you would." "Riley, she turned then, eyes sharp but not angry. "Just tired. You don't owe me an explanation. You never promised me anything." "I know," I said. "But I wanted to." Silence filled the space between us, thick with the sound of rain and the unsaid. Finally, she set her brush down. "Why did you come back?" "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Because when I looked at the ocean, it looked like you, wild, unpredictable, beautiful, and terrifying." But all I managed to say was, "Because I don't want to keep running." Her expression softened just a little. "Running from me? From feeling something real again?" She stepped closer, close enough for me to smell the faint scent of turpentine and salt on her skin. "You think you're broken," she whispered. "But maybe you're just scared to be seen." That's when I kissed her. It wasn't planned or gentle, it was desperate, aching, raw. The kind of kiss that comes after too much silence and too many lies to yourself. Her hands found my waist, mine tangled in her hair, and for a moment, the storm outside faded into nothing. When we finally pulled apart, she laughed softly, almost nervously. "You really have terrible timing." "I know," I said, breathless. "But I'm done pretending timing matters." She stared at me like she was memorizing my face, every regret, every tear, every piece of healing I still hadn't finished. And then instead of words, she painted. She pulled me to the canvas, dipped her fingers in blue paint, and brushed it gently along my collarbone. For the ocean, she murmured. Then a streak of gold on my cheek. For the light you still have. I laughed through tears. You're insane. Maybe, she said, smiling. But you came back to me. We spent the next week living like the rest of the world didn't exist. Days painting, swimming, laughing until our stomachs hurt. Nights tangled in blankets, whispering secrets into the dark. I told her things I'd never told anyone about my fear of never being enough, my mother's disapproval, the way I used to hide my relationships with women behind the label of friendship. Riley didn't judge. She just listened, her thumb tracing lazy circles on my wrist. One night, under a sky so full of stars it felt like we could drown in them, she asked, "Did you ever really love Claire?" I thought for a long time before answering. I did. But I think I loved who I wanted her to be more than who she actually was. She nodded like she understood. Sometimes love isn't a person. It's the version of yourself you thought you could be with them. The wind picked up, brushing her hair across her face. I tucked it behind her ear and she smiled, small, vulnerable, real. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that maybe we don't find love, we remember it?" I didn't answer. I just kissed her again because sometimes the heart understands before the mind does. But peace never lasts long, does it? A week later I got the message. "Claire." It was an email, short, clinical, almost detached. "I heard you canceled the engagement party. I hope you're okay. I think about you sometimes. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Maybe we could talk when you're back." It hit me like ice water down my spine. My past suddenly clawing its way back just as I was learning to breathe again. Riley noticed the change immediately. She was drying her hands when she asked, "Who was that?" "Claire," I said too quickly. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't speak. "She just wants to talk." "Do you?" I hesitated. "I don't know." Riley looked away, and for the first time she didn't try to hide her hurt. "You can talk to her. You probably should. But don't lie to yourself about why." "I'm not," I insisted, though even I didn't believe it. That night I couldn't sleep. The ghosts in my chest wouldn't let me. I thought about the years with Claire, the laughter, the comfort, the promises. Then I thought about Riley, the chaos, the honesty, the fire that made me feel alive again. Was it possible to love two people in completely different ways? Or was one just an illusion I hadn't let go of? By morning I had my answer. I drove back to the coast alone, the sunrise bleeding through the fog. I found Claire sitting in a cafe near the wharf, just like old times. She looked exactly the same, polished, perfect, heartbreakingly familiar. "Wow," she said, smiling. "You look different. Happier, I think." "Maybe," I said quietly. We talked, or rather she did. About her new job, her therapy, her realization that she'd been afraid of commitment, of the label, of being with another woman in a world that still made her question herself. She reached across the table. "I never stopped caring about you." For a moment my chest ached. But it wasn't longing. It was closure. "I cared about you too," I said. "But that doesn't mean we belong together." Her eyes softened, a tear slipping free. "There's someone else, isn't there?" I nodded. "Does she make you happy?" "Yes," I said. "In ways I didn't think I could be." She smiled sadly. "Then don't lose that." And just like that, the weight lifted. The version of love I had with Claire, the safe, familiar one, faded like the tide pulling back into the sea. When I returned to Riley's studio, she wasn't there. The canvases were covered with sheets, the brushes cleaned, the easel bare. My chest tightened with panic. I found a note taped to the wall, written in her looping handwriting. "You needed to find your answer. I needed to give you space to find it. I'll be at the pier if you still want me." I ran. The wind whipped through my hair as I reached the pier. She was standing at the edge, the sea foam splashing against her boots, watching the horizon like it might swallow her. When she turned, there were tears in her eyes, not of anger, but of fear. "I thought you chose her," she whispered. "I did," I said. "For a long time. But I'm done choosing ghosts." She blinked, not understanding. I took her hands in mine, cold and trembling. "Riley, I don't know what this is or where it's going. But I know it's real. And I know I don't want to lose it because I was too scared to try again." Her breath hitched. "You sure?" "No," I said honestly. "But maybe love isn't about being sure. Maybe it's about showing up anyway." She laughed through tears, that wild, beautiful sound that made everything else fade. Then she pulled me in and kissed me like the world was ending and beginning all at once. The sea roared. The sky broke open. And for the first time I didn't feel like I was starting over. I felt like I'd finally arrived. We went back to the studio that night. She painted me again, not as the broken woman she first met, but as the one standing in the storm, smiling. "This one," she said, brushing her fingers over the canvas, "I'll never sell." "Why?" "Because she's mine." And maybe for once I believed it. 3 months later, Monterey felt different. Not because the town had changed, the same fog rolled in every morning, the same gulls screamed above the pier, but because I'd rented a small apartment near the harbor, just 2 blocks from Riley's studio. Every morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of her humming downstairs, paintbrush already in hand. Sometimes I'd sneak up behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, resting my chin on her shoulder. She always smiled without looking away from the canvas. "You're getting clingy," she teased. "Maybe I just like watching you work." And it was true, there was something almost holy about the way she painted, as if she was speaking to the world in a language only colors understood. After everything, Claire, the heartbreak, the running life had become quiet again. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that hurt. It was peaceful, grounded. Like standing barefoot in the sand and realizing the tide wasn't there to drown you anymore, but to remind you that you were still alive. Riley had started a new series of paintings she called The Stillness Between Waves. She said it was about me. I said she was being dramatic. She just laughed and kissed the paint off her fingertips onto my cheek. Some nights we'd sit on the rooftop of her studio, sharing cheap wine and watching the stars. The town below us flickered with light, the sound of distant jazz from a bar, the laughter of strangers. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. Sometimes she'd play her guitar, soft, hesitant notes that carried into the night air. It wasn't perfect. We still fought over silly things mostly. She hated how I left the camera lens uncapped. I hated how she forgot to pay bills until the last minute. But even our arguments felt human, alive. We didn't break each other when we disagreed, we learned how to bend. One night, after a long day of painting and deadlines, I found her sitting on the floor of her studio, staring at a blank canvas. "What's wrong?" I asked, crouching beside her. She sighed. "It's weird. For years my art came from pain. From losing people, from grieving. Now I'm happy. And I don't know what to do with that." I smiled, brushing my thumb across her jaw. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe you don't have to bleed to create anymore." She looked up at me then, her eyes soft, luminous. "And what if I forget how to feel without the pain? Then feel everything else," I whispered. "The joy, the fear, the love, that still feeling." She kissed me, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't demand anything but presence. A few weeks later, she invited me to her gallery's opening night. It was her first solo exhibition since before her accident, before her life fell apart, before we met. I could tell she was nervous. She tried to hide it by pretending to focus on the lighting and the placement of each frame, but her hands shook when she tied her hair up. "You look beautiful," I said. "Liar," she muttered. "I look like I haven't slept in a week." "You look like someone who's about to show the world her soul. And that's beautiful." She smiled then, the kind that reached her eyes. The gallery was packed, local artists, critics, strangers drawn in by the buzz of Riley Hart's comeback. The walls were lined with her work. Storms and silence, grief and healing, and in the middle of it all, the piece that took my breath away. It was titled Finding Blue. Me standing in the surf, my reflection tangled with the waves, sunlight breaking through the clouds behind me. My face wasn't perfect, not polished like a portrait, but raw, alive. People whispered around us, admiring the brushwork, the emotion. I stood quietly, tears blurring my vision. When Riley finally joined me, I turned to her, voice trembling. "You painted me as if I'm free." She smiled softly. "You are." Later that night, when the last guest left and the lights dimmed, she pulled me into the middle of the empty gallery. "Dance with me," she said. "There's no music." "Then make some." I laughed, but she was already swaying, her forehead pressed to mine. The sound of the ocean through the open windows filled the silence, rhythmic, eternal. And there, between canvases of everything she'd ever felt, I realized something profound. Love didn't save me. It didn't fix me. It simply gave me a reason to keep showing up, one heartbeat at a time. A few months passed. We traveled short road trips along the coast, weekends spent in tiny towns with terrible motels and the best sunsets. She taught me to surf badly. I taught her how to take photos without cutting off people's heads. We built something quiet and strong, not perfect, but ours. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the cliffs above Big Sur, she turned to me with a strange look. "You know, I used to think love was supposed to be dramatic," she said. "All fireworks and heartbreak and screaming in the rain. And now?" I asked. "Now I think it's just this." She gestured at the horizon, sitting next to someone who makes the silence feel like home. I leaned into her shoulder. "You're getting poetic again." She chuckled. "Must be contagious." We sat there until the sky turned from gold to violet, until the stars began to appear. And in that perfect stillness, I understood what she meant. Love wasn't the storm. It was the calm that followed, the gentle rhythm that carried you forward when everything else had ended. A year later, I found her standing in front of our house, yes, our house, with a look of nervous determination. "Close your eyes," she said. "Why?" "Just do it." I sighed dramatically but obeyed. She led me down the small path to the backyard, her hands covering mine. When she finally told me to open them, I froze. It was a mural painted across the back wall of our house, alive with color. Two women standing hand in hand beneath an endless sky, their reflections rippling in the waves below. The ocean behind them was fierce, radiant, alive. "It's us," I whispered. She nodded, biting her lip. "I wanted to give you something permanent." My throat tightened. "Riley." "Before you say anything," she continued quickly, "I know I'm not great with words. I don't do fancy gestures or grand promises. But I do know this: I want to keep choosing you. Every morning, every storm, every quiet night. If you'll let me." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. "You're proposing, aren't you?" She laughed nervously. In my own weird, paint-stained way, yeah. I didn't need a ring or music or a perfect speech. I just needed that moment, the way her voice trembled, the way her eyes held both fear and hope. "Yes," I said, breathless. 1,000 times yes. She pulled me into her arms, spinning me until we both stumbled, laughing through tears. The world tilted, the sky exploded into color, and for a second everything made sense. The ceremony was small. Barefoot on the beach, just us, a few friends, and the waves that had witnessed every chapter of our story. As we exchanged vows, I caught her trembling again. "I used to paint the ocean because it made me feel less alone," she said softly. "Now I paint it because it reminds me of you, strong, unpredictable, alive." I smiled through tears. "And I used to think love was something that ended. But now I know it just changes its shape." When she kissed me, the wind rose around us, carrying the sound of laughter and the crash of waves. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. And that was enough. That night, after everyone had gone, we sat by a bonfire, toes buried in the sand, the stars thick above us. She looked at me and said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" "If Claire hadn't left you, you never would have come here." I smiled. "If I hadn't come here, I never would have met you." She poked my side. "So we should probably send her a thank you card." We both laughed until our sides hurt. And then we fell quiet again, watching the tide roll in, slow and steady. I leaned into her, the firelight dancing across her face, and whispered, "Do you ever think about the first time we met?" "All the time," she said. "You looked like someone who'd forgotten how to breathe. And now," she smiled, "now you're the reason I remember how." The waves kissed the shore, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat syncing with ours. And somewhere between the firelight and the sound of the sea, I realized, love wasn't something I found on that solo trip. It was something that found me, patient, persistent, waiting for me to stop running. Months later, I stood in the same spot where I first saw her painting by the rocks. The air smelled like salt and rain, the sky painted in gold. Behind me, Riley's laughter floated through the breeze as she packed up her easel. "Ready to go?" she called. "In a minute," I said. I lifted my camera and took one last photo, the waves, the light, and her silhouette framed against the setting sun. It wasn't a picture of an ending. It was the beginning of us, of everything still waiting to be written. And this time I wasn't alone. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.